We need to do a better job at making people not feel like failures early on for their misalignment with aspects of certain skill sets, as opposed to saying, hey, like you haven't found your thing yet. It's like in really young people, why do we even use that word? Like they're not failing, they're in the process of R&D on what are their talents, you know?
Welcome, everyone. I'm here with Edward Norton. Everyone probably knows him as one of the best actors in the world, but I've known Ed for a while. And what I've known Ed for is really about his being an entrepreneur and a lot of things he's done in the world around entrepreneurism, and also a great philanthropist. And as you know, with this show, it's called Over the Wall because it's about exploring the mind of the entrepreneur and the challenges that entrepreneurs have around failure and getting through the walls or getting over the walls. So I figured it'd be great to talk to Ed about his life, his journey, a lot of what he's done on, once again, being an entrepreneur in the world, as well as what he's done, obviously, being a great actor. So welcome, Edward. How you doing?
Great to see you, man.
Let's jump in. And
fire away.
Where I wanted to start is actually with, as I said, there's a picture of my grandfather back here, and we've talked about it before, our grandfathers. And I thought it'd be great to start with your grandfather, Jim Rouse, who I was a hero of. I went to school in Baltimore, and he was like the person in Maryland. And he built all these amazing planned communities, but he was just an amazing human being. He's like an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. And I just had so much admiration. When we met for the first time, he said, "This is my grandfather." So I'm curious, like, about his life, how it influenced you, like my grandfather influenced mine. Tell me a little bit there, if we can start there with your grandfather.
Yeah, well, it's great. I love the stories you told me about your granddad and his commitment to celebrating every day. That story you told me about how your granddad's every day said, "Happy days are here again."
Yes, he sang the song. Yeah,
I really like. I think that. That's probably why we kind of felt an affinity. My granddad was like, he was orphaned by the time he was in his early teens. Grew up in a very working class fishing town on the Chesapeake Bay, and had a very almost like a Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer kind of an existence with he and his brother were the youngest of six, and they kind of wandered rootless amongst older sisters, but basically camping out on islands and hunting and fishing in the Chesapeake Bay. And I think it was partly his kind of, humble roots and actually his having been self-reliant from a very young age, and also a polio survivor. He had polio and gotten through that. He told me once about the stretches where they gave him those injections with the needles that were like the length of your arm up the spinal column, and all the things that he had to do. And amazingly wasn't crippled by it. But I think, you hear this from people. Esther Perel, who I really admire, talks a lot in her work about people who were Holocaust survivors and who basically either made the choice to live even more passionately or to become very fatalistic and fade. And that's obviously the extreme example, but I do think people who have been through real struggles of different kinds sometimes have that particular passion for getting the most out of life, never taking anything for granted, infusing what they do with joy and appreciation of the fact that they get to do it. And my granddad was definitely like yours. He was that sort. He was kooky. He was funny. He was very unconventional, iconoclastic in his crazy way of dressing. He wore like plaid pants and green jackets and fishing hats, lures in them to meetings with big important people. And he had a very homespun kind of quality, but he also, I think that thing of being self-reliant and being having to scrap and be creative. He put himself through he put himself through night school and law school, hustling pool and parking cars and doing all kinds of stuff. He was just one of those very self-made people who, in the end, applied a lot of that to not only his conviction that business had a responsibility to serve more than its shareholders. Like long before Mark Benioff, my granddad used to talk about basically the idea of stakeholder responsibilities, and that the stakeholders were your community first and foremost, your employees, the environment, all of it. My granddad really had that idea of, in fact, I think in the 60s, he's quoted as having said that the legitimate purpose of business is not profit, but to provide a needed service so well that profit flows as the natural result. But he really believed in a service ethos, even in business. And then he took kind of that entrepreneurial sensibility that he brought to business and to the idea of ethical business over into his own philanthropic work.
But you can tell about, before you jump there, he was amazing. I mean, he built these planned communities, right? And like Columbia, he built downtown Baltimore. He did the South Street Seaport. He did this. He had this idea.
Nathaniel Hall in Boston.
Yeah, Nathaniel Hall. He had all these concepts about bringing. It sounded like they were all like community-based. How do you get it together?
It was very interesting. He had a really strong conviction, even in the Eisenhower era when he was on Eisenhower's Housing Commission. He was one of the first people to start talking about suburban sprawl. He said, like, he worried about American cities as early as like 1955. He said the interstate highway system is going to create low density development, and that's going to create a middle class flight from the cities. And if we abandon our cities, if we let the cities become only places that basically the 1% and very poor people live, we're going to see the hollowing out of the vitality of the urban center. And then all of that came true across the 60s and 70s. And so he was looked at as a very prescient urban thinker. He really believed very much in almost like he believed in community. He had believed in the importance of the town center, not just as a place of business, but as kind of almost the Greek idea of the forum, the marketplace for ideas and for culture and all of it. And he believed really passionately that if you don't create societies that are inclusive racially and economically, you won't have that ultimately the cost to everybody will be enormous. And he really was like, I mean, I have a memo of his in a frame that I'm very proud of when he founded Columbia, Maryland, this new planned community between Baltimore and Washington in 1967. He wrote a letter to all of the real estate firms that would broker properties. And he said, Columbia, Maryland is an inclusive city. We are colorblind. He basically was like the anti-Fred Trump. He really did say, there are no different standards. There's no, blacklisting, red listing. Where he said this is a community where we're inviting everybody of all walks of life in to be a part of this community, and that was in '67. So he was a remarkable person. I think that one of the things that he was fundamentally entrepreneurial from his teenage years, but I think he really believed that sometimes, like, one of the things I really learned from him when I used to ask him, like, why he did what he did after he retired, which in some ways was maybe even more significant in that he helped really conceive and pass into law the low-income housing tax credit, which in this era where people talk about impact investment is all the rage now, right? Everybody from private equity funds to everybody else is, ESG and impact investing and all this triple bottom line investing, all this kind of stuff. In 1986, when they passed the low-income housing tax credit, my granddad then built the Enterprise Community Partners organization. He figured out that market capitalism was not investing in affordable housing, and yet government investment was always capped and limited and not necessarily the most efficient. With the low-income housing tax credit, he figured out this kind of entrepreneurial way that you could incentivize market capital to move toward investment in affordable and get great returns, right? And to this day, I would argue that the low-income housing tax credit as an impact investment mechanism, it's hundreds of billions of capital have moved as a function of that. And when I got older and I worked for him, and it was like everyone from Warren Buffett to the biggest bankers in the world would meet with him because he had solved a problem for them. There was something called the Community Reinvestment Act, which most banks looked at as philanthropy. They were like, we're never going to get returns from our CRA investments. And my granddad figured out, along with others, how to actually get good returns from socially positive investments. And he was really lionized by a lot of the captains of industry as a result. And I just said to him, what made you? And he said, look, there's always a way to there's always a, when there's a, he really did look at failures as an opportunity. He looked
let's talk about it, because
he looked at space not as an unaddressable problem, but as an opportunity to lean into. And he was amazing at that. He was amazing at looking at things that people would tag as a negative condition, and in some cases, things people wrote off as permanent negatives that we have to accept as a part of a free society. And he would say, no, that's, if we accept these problems and don't look at them as opportunities, we're failing. And he was incredibly good at looking at the opportunity in failure.
I didn't know you worked with them. Did he, like my grandfather told me stories of failures and tough times, and he had to close his place he made handbags during the Depression because he couldn't get the materials. And that was he did it to join the war effort and work for Grumman and stuff. You worked with your grandfather, and I mean, did he tell you any stories about failure? I mean, your grandfather built something amazing at the end, but the in-between is usually he took on things that were new. Did you see failures in him that happened and he told you and they said, this is, did you see that, or did you hear stories like that?
It wasn't something, by the time I was coming of age and aware of him, he was so successful at what he was doing. And, but I would say there's a couple things. One is he told me about his treatments for polio when he was a kid, and how he sort of used to like chant to himself, like, I'm going to walk. Like he was like refused to be crippled by it. And he had really incredible will. He was orphaned in his early teens. He told me at the start of the Depression, he hitchhiked from the eastern shore of Maryland to Los Angeles to get a boat to Hawaii because he had an older sister married to a naval officer, and so he could go to the University of Hawaii for free. And he hitchhiked across America in the middle of the Depression, got a deck passage on a boat to Hawaii, went for 1 year to the University of Hawaii. And he said he was so homesick. That he went all the way back home after a year with his tail between his legs. But he said later what he realized was that he loved where he was from. He actually really loved his community, and that became a part of like literally why he did what he did. He ended up becoming really committed to the idea of community, and he said it taught him a lot to go to this exotic place and realize, maybe I'm actually happier and more effective in the place I know and understand. And that's what, he never moved his business out of Maryland. So I'd say the thing in 1979, when he retired from his very successful career in urban planning and commercial development, he retired at 65, and he was like a force. People were like, with this guy, why? But basically, he had decided for himself that he needed to, even though he was very progressive, he really wanted to work in a real mission-driven sense. He wanted to dedicate the rest of his life to helping other people. And so he retired to focus on that. And I think that Enterprise grew out of the fact that two women in this housing a Section 8 kind of a housing development in Washington, D.C. called Jubilee Housing came to him basically with the kind of nascent idea that became Enterprise, and they pitched him on it, and he told them all the reasons it wouldn't work. And he said in the middle of the night, he woke up and went, oh my God, I'm the problem. They're right and I'm wrong. And I've just basically told them all the typical things and he went back and worked with them and provided the capital they wanted to take over their these buildings as affordable housing nonprofits, and out of that, it wasn't so much a failure, but it was in part he realized that he was echoing or parroting the apathy of the moment, and then saw in himself. So when he launched Enterprise, a lot of people thought he was crazy. And, now, 40 years later, Enterprise is the fourth largest nonprofit developer of housing in the US and has built a couple million units and raised about 30 billion of capital.
And your dad's a lawyer, right? Which he's an environmental
He's
lawyer.
a lawyer by training. My dad was an assistant U.S. attorney under Carter in Maryland, and he's a scholar. He was a corporate litigator. He was a U.S. attorney, and then he went into environmental advocacy. He was a litigator for the Wilderness Society and founded the Grand Canyon Trust. He helped found the Rails to Trails Conservancy. He founded the Grand Canyon Trust. He founded the Nature Conservancy's China Country program when he was with them. And my dad is a serial mission-driven entrepreneur. He's founded at least 4 organizations, all that are kind of really tremendously effective environmental advocacy organizations in different forms.
So would you say maybe I'm stating the obvious, but would you say your grandfather and your father, if I dig into what you do in your life, seem to have a pretty major impact on you as a person outside of the acting? We'll talk about that in a second, but and
it's interesting. My mother was a teacher, but my mother's a career educator and teacher. But in the later years of her life, she was actually the director of educational grants for a big foundation in Baltimore, and she was all over the country looking at things people were doing to try to innovate and change, the education system. And she was essentially, grant writing for writing grants for these kinds of organizations. So I would say that a lot of my youth was characterized by listening to adults around tables at holidays and things, talking about the money they were trying to raise to start something or the struggles, things. I mean, the amount of time I spent listening to the people in my family talk about fundraising for mission-driven causes, and the amount of time I knew my dad was dedicated to pitching people on these ideas, getting people to buy into, the righteousness and the innovation of the things that they were trying to pull off. It was a part of the atmosphere and the air we breathed around where I was growing up, for sure.
But you sort of take a different turn, because although later in your life, or when we met each other, you've done so much in that area. But before we go there, and like you go into act, you decide I'm going to go to Yale and head into acting, and it's different than your grandfather, your father, your mother. You could have just joined your grandfather's, although you're part of Enterprise community, obviously on the board and doing things there. But you could have just jumped in there. Easily probably could have been a part of that, but you decided to go take a totally different route to start. And
although it's funny
here,
when I went to college, I actually went to study. I started off thinking I was going to study astronomy and physics, and I wanted to be part of the JPL team landing the Perseverance rover on Mars. Literally, those were my fantasies. And then I came up against the brick wall of my lack of aptitude for math. I just did not have the math. It is not my God-given talent. And as I was laboring, I actually had one of those very, talk about failure. I had a very decisive moment, a very binary moment when I was 18, 19, my freshman year in college. I was laboring through math and physics at very 101 levels. And I had this roommate who had gone to a public school in Western Pennsylvania. He drank like a fish. He showed me his writing for this remedial English class he was in, and it was like chicken scratching of a child. And he wasn't rich, and he wasn't an alumni's kid. And I couldn't figure out how is this guy at Yale? I really couldn't figure it out. And And one night he's trying to get me to go to a bar and watch the football with him. And I said, dude, I got problem sets, and he says, show me it. And he starts laughing at me, and he sits down and in about 10 minutes does a week's worth of my problem sets, takes me through it. And I look at him like, what? And he says, that's my thing. And I said, what do you mean that's your thing? I've never seen you out there. He said, I'm in the graduate school in applied math. And he was 18, and I was like, if this guy who he's been so drunk that I've taken styrofoam cups with peanut butter and glued them to his face without him waking up. If he's that much better than me at this, I'm not, it's like Salieri and Mozart. It really is that moment where you realize like, okay, there's a level of gift that some people have that, it's not my strong suit. And I do think those moments are important because in a lot of ways it forces you to say, well, there's things that come very naturally to me that don't come so easily to someone like him. What are they? And I think if you're lucky in that phase of your life, I sometimes say to people like, nobody should know what they want to do when they're 23. Like, I mean, maybe some people do, but the truth is in the early phase of your young adult life, a lot of what's of value is figuring out what you don't like doing and what you're not good at, just going through the process of discovery to figure out what are my strengths versus my weaknesses. What do I get joy out of and doesn't feel like work to me? What could I wake up and do till 3 a.m. and go to sleep and wake up and do again and feel fired up versus what just feels like drudgery to me, no matter how much I'm getting paid or what people say about it, because that process of filtering is important. And so I didn't even study drama at Yale. I studied history, but I had this notion. I'd always been very hooked on it. And in fact, my grandfather, who paid for me to go to college, he paid my college tuition. I felt very obligated to him because he was so, I basically was like, oh my God, if I go and tell my granddad he paid for me to go to Yale and now I want to be an actor, this is going to be horrible. He's going to be like, and it was exactly the opposite. I went to see him and sat on his porch with him, and he basically, I said, I feel like I have this obligation and he said, like, you can be of service in anything you're doing. He said that everything can be infused with a spirit of what is it that serves other people. And he said, the arts, he told me Winston Churchill's right. Like, if you don't have these things, what are we fighting for? Right. And he talked about the arts and his passion for the arts in a community and all these things. And he basically just said, he was like, I'll pay you money not to go into finance. Like he said, I'll you tell me what a starting salary is at a bank or an investment bank. And he was like, please don't do that. Not that there's not, he knew that wasn't for me. Yeah. And he basically was very, very encouraging about following your passions and in due course figuring out how you can bring a spirit of service to your community through that. And that was a very important liberation for me, for sure.
But you go from this one concept of your life, now you're jumping into learning how to be an actor, but that path is a tough path, obviously. How many millions and millions of people, I would say same thing with entrepreneurs. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Everyone maybe want to be an actor. Everybody has this concept, a lot of times because of money, fame, whatever it is, but I often say the walls are there to keep the fakers out. Like, you hit the first wall, a lot of people drop out. It's like entrepreneurs. I assume it's obviously the same in acting, but somehow in that early time, I guess, you were probably zigging and zagging. I'm curious, like, what are some of the challenges you went through and to get to where you are? But I assume at the beginning it sucked. It usually, like, the first 5 years of okay is kind of hard, or what was it?
But again,
sucks in a good way. Like you're happy.
Yeah, and it depends what this is something I got from my granddad and my dad and my mom and stuff. I didn't have expectations. I mean, I had things I thought I might be good at or whatever. But like when I was 21 years old and rolling out of college, like I didn't expect anybody to. I had no expectations for like that the world was just going to hand me like a a golden ticket. You know what I mean? I just didn't. I didn't come from people who raised me to think that way. And I figured you got to go and make your way in these things. But also, to me, the flip, just moving to New York City when you're 21 years old is an adventure. It's exciting. And actors are, I mean, I always say actors are fundamentally entrepreneurs. They're the product. Like you are the product that you're pitching. But also, I was very into just developing my own sense of my chops. I was into working on that craft and studying and doing low stakes downtown theater, and I mean, I loved it. And the vicissitudes of auditioning and stuff like that to me were, I don't know, it was sort of, because I didn't have expectation, I didn't take it hyper personally. I just took it as data, you know what I mean? And I would do things like volunteer to be a reader for casting directors when they were auditioning actors for roles, because then you sat on the other side of the line and watched tons of actors come through. And it actually, that more than anything made me realize, oh, there's tons of reasons people don't get a gig, and yet they leave the room and the casting director and the director go, that guy was great. I mean, not right for this, but man, he was great. And I realized, like, those things that people talk about as failures, I realized, oh, I can go in and audition and not get the role, and it can be a huge success, not a failure. It can be I can have logged an impression that's going to, pay me back later, right? And and some of it's just attitude. Nonetheless, I think most actors who become somewhat entrepreneurial in the sense that you can't really wait on other people. So you end up writing, you end up producing, you end up getting together with other actors to create a theater company and put up your own plays, right? Like, if you're not entrepreneurial as an actor, you're going to sit with your thumb up your ass a lot of the time, waiting on a phone call, waiting on the fantasy of a phone call that's just not going to come. And so you, and one of the, a person who had a huge impact on me was a person who later became my partner, Jim Houghton, in creating this. He founded the Signature Theater Company. He was an actor. My first professional gig as an actor was in an Edward Albee play during a season that the Signature Theater did of Albee's work. And he had seen me in a play, liked it, asked me to come in and audition for this play he was doing. And ultimately, like, I met this guy, Jim Houghton. He directed the play, and he was an actor. He had been frustrated by, like everybody at times. And he finally he had been in a play by a certain playwright and wondered why more of that playwright's work wasn't produced in New York. And he had this idea to say, well, what if we did a theater company based around one playwright per season? What if we looked at plays and the work of playwrights the way we do when we see a Picasso retrospective or hear a Mozart, program? Why don't we do that with playwrights? And so he created a theater company around a very new idea, which was a company dedicated to the work of one playwright per season, so that you could see a body of work by a playwright. And you would think in 1991, most ideas about how to approach the American theater have been addressed in one way or another. And lo and behold, this little thing that he started with $35,000 scraped together from some friends to do a season of Romulus Linney, within 4 years won the Pulitzer Prize for a new play by Horton Foote, and had the greatest playwrights in the history of American theater, Edward Albee, Horton Foote, Arthur Miller, August Wilson, lining up to do seasons, Sam Shepard, Adrienne Kennedy, Maria Irene Fornés, and they were all telling each other, finally, someone has built a theater around the body of work of a playwright. It was an authentically new idea. And watching Jim do that and being part of the early days of building that company and then getting more and more involved, it was like, that was like all the same thrill and difficulty of a startup. It was a startup. It was just, but it was like watching someone find a niche that he leaned into and created something really great out of nothing that still is now one of the great institutional theaters in the country.
When you think about, so you talk about the theater company, like finding its niche and then beyond, use the word niche, but really finding its way. It was obviously a little bit of a windy road, but we talked a couple of weeks ago about like Fight Club and how it's this great success, but it actually it wasn't really big when it came out. And I didn't realize it either. You were telling me like, hey, this was like, we had all these expectations, but it took a while for the world to see what we had. And I'm just curious, when like you've probably seen this all through, and you know, obviously you just put out, Motherless Brooklyn that you directed, and you were obviously did amazing work there, but also, some challenges and probably, you have these expectations and maybe it takes time, but what was it like? I mean, tell me a little bit about, like, we think the movie business is like, you make it, you're out, it's a success. You got big names.
I think
it's the ultimate I feel like it's the ultimate product launch. You're creating this product, you pop it out in the world.
Movies. I mean, when you go, every time you make a movie, it's like starting a new company. I mean, it's like you literally. I tell people you conceive the product, write the business plan, like this, which is the script, right? You put the people together, you get all the management, you have to design, build, launch the product in an 18-month cycle, and then you do it all again and again and again. It's like starting a new company and taking it to market every 18 months, and the thing is, and it's not even a widget, it's not even like, it's kind of alchemy, the product, the thing you're making. So yeah, there's I think the whole filmmaking process is very fundamentally entrepreneurial, but also, I learned a lot of things. I mean, one is I almost got this role. Like one time I came really close to getting a role in a film with Robert Redford and Michelle Pfeiffer, called, can't remember. It was written by Joan Didion or something. It was about reporters. Anyway, I almost got this role that was like, would have been my first, like, all the way through the movie role in a little supporting part or whatever. And it was down to me and one other actor, and I didn't get it. And it was one of the first times I was actually really bummed. Like, I was like, wow, that would have been life-changing. Now I'm just like, back to temping at whatever, Lever Brothers or whatever, like whatever the hell I was doing. And I didn't get it. And if I had gotten that role, I would have left New York and been away. And like 30 days later, I got the notice. I got told by someone about Primal Fear, this film Primal Fear with Richard Gere, which I ended up auditioning for and ended up being my first film. And so, it's very hard in the disappointment of a moment to, like, when people say the kinds of things I'm about to say, it always sounds like weak. It sounds like a weak aspirin against the pain that it's like, yeah, oh yeah, like being disappointed. There's an opportunity that is out there that you wouldn't have gotten, and you just go, yeah, give me another baby aspirin. I'd rather have I need a Vicodin right now, not a baby aspirin. But the truth is that has happened to me a lot, where a disappointment has ended up keeping me in the wind for the thing that I really wanted to happen to collide with me. And I think that you kind of just gotta let it go. You just gotta let it go.
How do you do that? It's one of the things we talk about here is like about the mental game, right? It's like the mental game, because I think when they see people's success, they go, oh, like you said, it's like a Vicodin you needed. It's an impact on your life at the time. Somehow you wake up in the morning, and I'm curious of what you do, because it's that you wake up in the morning, you're like, it's not like, that was nothing, it had an impact on you, but you process it a certain way, and you wake up in the morning. So what do you do mentally? Because you're in a world of like acting is a big world of rejection. It's like entrepreneurs, like you said, it's like you're an entrepreneur just out there being rejected all the time. Same with entrepreneurs, you get a lot of no's until you get a yes. But what did you do to keep in the game mentally? Is there anything you do?
I honestly, like, you remember the great old comedy record, Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, the 2,000-year-old man?
Yeah, of course.
And there's this one thing when he goes, this is one of my favorite lines. He says, "What was the main mode of transportation 2,000 years ago?" And he goes, or 10,000 years ago, and he goes, "Fear. Fear was the main mode of transportation. You saw a lion, you ran, you know." I kind of think fear laced with aspiration or ambition laced with fear tends to like make you get up and look at your to-do list and just, you know, get going. But I mean, honestly, dealing with disappointment is its own psychology. I think, you know, there's a lot of people who are wiser than me about that. I'll say this, in my own life, something that's been an airbag against emotional disappointment is having a lot of interests, like just simply having a diversity of interests and staying involved in a variety of things is helpful because having something to turn your brain into with focus. And I'll use an example. Like, I'm a pilot. I've been flying for like 16 years, right? And I've had very distinct moments where the noise in my brain was getting sort of toxic. And when the fact that I would go, you know what, I'm going to go get my instrument rating, or I'm going to go get my thing, because those engaging with those things was like this great equalizer on my head. And I find surfing to be like that. I find, you know, playing guitar to be like that. I find hiking and being out of doors to be like that. All the things I do that I'm interested in, and many others, just, you know, keeping your brain positively activated and frankly distracted. Because when you're disappointed, you need to frankly just get distracted out of the, you know, what Eckhart Tolle calls the brain body loop, right? You get into you keep repeating the thought, it makes your body tense, it fires your adrenals, and it intensifies the negative thought. And you have to break it. And I find, for me, just having a diversity of things that I feel, you know, if one thing's not going well, but these things are fun, it sort of makes you, it's quicker. It short circuits that thing where you characterize your whole life by the disappointment, because you're able to go, well, you know, I can grab my board and go surfing. Life's pretty good. I can, you know.
You try to break the cycle of thought. Instead of just cycling on the negative thought, you're like, let me go get something in my life that I know I can at least do something good at. I can surf. I can go fly a plane. Everyone can pick. So you're saying, like, go put yourself in a place that can give you some feedback loops that don't let you stay in the cycle, stay in the loop.
By the way, that has not changed for me at all. Like, I'm 51, right? And I've done a lot of things I'm proud of, and that other people point to. Oh, he's good at this, or he's made these great films, or whatever. You have financial success. You have whatever. I was really passionate about Motherless Brooklyn. I love the film. I love what we did. I'm proud of everybody. You know, we put it out on the cusp of like COVID and stuff like, and it didn't get the box office that you want out of a major studio release, et cetera. Probably like 5 years later, we might have made that for a streamer or something like that. You know what I mean? But, and so you go, there's this dimension of disappointment that sits alongside and no matter how many times, I mean, there's literally nobody in the trade that hasn't gone through thinking something was going to go better than it went, and getting measured, getting the bigger small body blow of sort of something not doing well on a short-term metric of short-term financial, you know, recoup, box office, whatever, right? And so you go through that, and for me even now, you know,
what does that feel like?
When I feel a kind of an ambivalence or a sense of disappointment about something, the fact that I'm involved in some of my own companies, forget even the huge balancing of having kids, or all the things that are really, really profound equalizers, and dial the volume down. Even if I just separate that completely and look at like, what are you doing with your day? For me, having things to turn my attention to, that by working on them every day, I can create a sense of positive progress and feel like my life's rich, I'm applying myself, I'm getting, those remain for me the best ways to distract myself from the head spins around a major or minor disappointment.
Right. I'm curious. I had Lisa Billou on Lisa and Tom, they founded the company Quest, nutrition Quest bars. And Lisa was on the show coming up, and we talked about the little voice in our heads. She said, I've got this little voice in my head. And I said, what is it? And she said that she fights sometimes and says, stupid. She says, it says I'm stupid. And she says, when I'm in meetings with like a bunch of men sometimes, she said it, I feel like I hear, and I said, well, my voice is I'm young. Like I'm too young to run a company that's a couple $1 billion, and I went public at 33. I said, I always had, I'm too young. So I'd be in meetings, I'm like, I'm just too young to do this company. Like, what am I, like, and she said, so I'm curious, like, when you think about, I wanted to ask her, do you have that voice? Do you have that thing that we all try to beat?
Yeah, I think everybody does.
What does it say? Do you have that? What is it? Do you have? Can you tell me what it says if you have it?
Mine says, you're so much smarter than everyone. How can you be fucking up so badly? No, I'm kidding. Honestly, it's funny. I don't think you're stupid or too young or whatever. I'm more, I think sometimes, like, if you've gone through enough cycles of a thing, like putting movies out or something, you know that there's just so many ephemeral things that affect the moment, and there's a lot of luck involved. The timing of a given moment, it's just sometimes there's just a lot of luck. And like you mentioned Fight Club, like I think all of us couldn't have felt better about Fight Club. We were so excited about it. We felt that it was what it in fact was and became for the people we made it for, our own generation, our own crowd, etc. And the vagaries of the moment that they released it and the way they marketed all these things, it didn't do well at all. In fact, you could almost qualify it like a big box office failure initially. It went on to sell a gazillion DVDs and end up being in the black, all these things. None of that matters. In the moment, you're just like, oh, what happened? Like, what happened? Oh my God, our number didn't come up. It wasn't like, oh, we're stupid, we didn't make a good movie, or fuck those guys, they didn't market it right. It was just like, man, in just the weird chemistry of the moment, it didn't connect initially the way we thought and hoped it was gonna do. And it wasn't like, what did we do wrong? It was just, sometimes it's literally just accepting that there are things that happen that are outside of your control. You know what I mean?
Right.
You can't control everything. And we our lives are complex systems, and businesses are complex systems, and the market, everything. We live in these enormously complex systems. It's like the weather. You can't control these things always. There's a lot you can do to control it, but you have to accept that you can't control everything. And
but to continue, obviously you're not quit. You didn't quit. Like you can get those loops, and you can be like, you could just say, I'm out. I got the loop, but somehow something propels you forward, right? It's what is it?
Yeah.
Because get back that many negative feedback loops.
Right. Well,
it's not overnight. I guess.
Let's be honest. Getting some positive at some point is an important criteria.
Yeah.
If you're continuing the path. I mean, I think if you have to always be honest with yourself and say, like, what kind of a feedback am I getting? And am I seeing, everyone talking, am I seeing the evidence that I have, that there's good cause to have ongoing conviction that this is something I should do, or that this is worthwhile, or there is a market for this. So, it's not like you can do anything by force of will. You have to be cognizant of the signals you're getting back, and whether they're adjustable, whether you can make the adjustments that are necessary to like move through them or learn from them or whatever. Like, should some hands be folded? For sure. Anyone who's played poker, it's not like just force of will means you're going to make every hand a winner. You're not. Like, and knowing when to judiciously like alter what you're doing or fold a hand or whatever, I think is really important too. I mean, that's kind of back to my college thing. Like I think I got a really strong piece of evidence when I saw this guy's talent for math, who was in every other way, underperforming in some sense. And like, to me, that actually was, I read that right. Like, that actually wasn't for me. That was actually, I'm better as a fan of the people at JPL, as a supporter, a financial supporter of research, whatever. Like, it actually wasn't where I was gonna contribute the most. And I think I folded that hand at the right phase of my life. You know what I mean?
But did you think that, I mean, we talked about, I had like Chopra on, Deepak Chopra, and we were talking about purpose in life and stuff like that. And we talk about that like the entrepreneurial journey or the journey of your life, whatever, it's like, there's this idea of purpose, and that you're like driven because there's some greater hand that dealt you something that you feel like you got to see manifest. And I guess, do you subscribe to that philosophy, or do you say it's like, it just kind of, maybe that's too spiritual? I mean, what's your sense?
No. I mean, without, without injecting into it like divinity or fate or like, divine purpose, anything like that. I think that, we're talking about Mozart and Salieri. It's one of the reasons I think it's one of the reasons I think Amadeus as a artistic piece of work is actually really profound. The play and Milos Forman's great film, because it's the idea of the confrontation by someone who's given their life to something with the idea that people may come along who have been given a God-given talent, born with a talent, and it almost seems unfair. It almost seems, but do people have that? Was Mozart preternaturally gifted? I mean, like, when you really read about that and realize that like Haydn was considered one of the greatest composers in Europe at the time. And when Haydn was in his 40s, he said that his only peer in the sonata form was Mozart, who was 8. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not, that, and those, people have gifts. Like, do people have natural gifts? There's no doubt about it. I think people have gifts and strengths. And as a society, one of the things that really resonates with me is that idea of that what we need to be doing is not cookie cutter educational forms. We need to be trying to help people identify what their gifts are. By the way, it's one of the reasons I think it's really cool in the modern era that schools like MIT and Caltech and whatever, like these, when I was I went to public school all my life. So did you, right? And you remember when we were growing up, there was this idea that vocational school, like there was the VO-Tech school, vocational technical school in my county, right? And it was like there was this huge sort of derogatory bias about the idea of taking classes at VO-Tech. It was like, oh, those are the kids who aren't gonna get the grade they need to go to college.
They couldn't make it in. That's right. They had to move it
tech or whatever. And you think about like what Tesla's doing and whatever. It's like the VO-Tech is changing our life like a lot more than one could argue, liberal arts education is. And even in the years since we were kids, I think we're seeing, with the idea of STEM classes and all this stuff and technology, if you push aside all the bullshit about tech and people making billion-dollar fortunes, all these things, the thing I think is exciting about it is that I think we're in this moment where people are realizing that a lot of our, a huge amount of creativity gets expressed within engineering and tech. It's like we're not, we should be celebrating not only like vocational skills, technical skills, all these things, but that really like probably we spend too much time training people to be generalists when in fact we ought to be helping people unlock what their own sense of their natural gifts and their purpose and their talent is, maybe a little bit earlier. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It feels like if everyone did that, if everyone was on that path, you would think the world would be a happier place in general. Like if people weren't stuck in some place, if they were following whatever that is, I'm a writer, I'm fixing cars, I'm doing whatever. It just seems like there's a pressure to be something different than the purpose in your life, which really say is like, it'll always have its challenges, but you get through them because you feel like God put you on earth for it. Right?
But it gets back to that thing of like over the fence. I mean, if you think about, obviously, just think about all the stories of people who the education system was writing them down because of their incapacity to sort of fold into a certain standardized thing, from Einstein to Bill Gates to, it's just like, and you like, we need to do a better job at making people not feel like failures early on for their misalignment with aspects of certain skill sets, as opposed to saying, hey, like you haven't found your thing yet, but that's not failure. That's just, like our education system essentially confers failure on people who fall outside the median line by defining their grades or their whatever as failure, which starts to become stigma and starts to become self-fulfilling. You know what I mean? And of course you hear the stories of people break out of it, but I don't even think we talk about failure. The word is a bad word. It's like, it's like you should replace it with like learning or discovery or whatever. It's like in really young people, why do we even use that word? Like they're not failing. They're in the process of R&D on what are their talents,
That was part one of my conversation with my dear friend, Edward Norton. For part two, stay tuned. We'll be releasing that episode next week. In the meantime, you can find all sorts of content on my social channels. I'm at LoCascio everywhere. Come say hi, and we'll be back next week with Edward Norton, part two.